Hello everyone and welcome to our first screencast for week 3. This week we are going to be taking everything we've been doing from back in week 1 where we defined communication, week 2 where we defined communication, we talked about communication competence, and we talked about implicit personal theories, and now we move into our next piece of material on the self. This is really important material, and what I want to do is I want to begin with some clarification actually. So this first screencast, and maybe this will take one screencast, that's the plan, but it might take more than one, we'll see. I actually want to distinguish between personality, self, and identity, distinguishing the parts of us. we've got pieces of who we are that impact the ways we choose to communicate in everyday life. And oftentimes what I find is in our everyday language, these three concepts, personality, self, and identity, can all get tossed around as being the same thing. When the fact is they are not the same thing, and they each do different things and make sense of different things for us in who and how we are. And they do and drive different things in the ways that we choose to communicate. Okay, so this first part is simply going to be walking you through personality, self, and identity. Okay, so let's start with personality. Okay, so personality is think about this. Think about when people talk about personality. They'll say, that person's got a really good personality. They've got a great personality. And oftentimes what they mean with personality is actually sense of humor. In my experience, so your sense of humor is going to be a part of your personality, but that's not really what it is. Your personality, and so I had to do some outside research. Our textbook does not cover this. This is outside material. I'm going to sort of do outside material, come into some stuff with the text, and then come back to outside, okay? And then we'll go back in with the next screencast, okay? So personality refers to individual differences in characteristic patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving. Here's the thing. Your personality is a little more wired into who you are, your temperament, okay? I hate to jump around like this, but the personality is going to be more the nature part of who you are rather than the nurture. In the whole nature-nurture debate, the real answer is both. There's a whole lot going on with nature, and there's a whole lot going on with nurture when it comes to what makes us who we are and how we think and see and feel about ourselves. So your personality are going to be your more consistent patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting. You are probably not the same person right now that you were 10 years ago. But there are threads of who you were from back when you were a little version of you that pull through all the way up to who you are right now. I can say that about myself. I am not the same person I was when I was, 3 versus when I was 9 versus when I was a teenager versus now. But I can definitely look back at 8-year-old Brandon and 13-year-old Brandon and 17-year-old Brandon and 25-year-old Brandon and 35-year-old Brandon, and there are some things that are pretty consistent in the ways that I've thought, in the ways that I feel, in the ways that I act. They're relatively stable patterns, and they cannot be changed easily. Yes, you can make changes, but they don't change easily, okay? A good example of this is introversion or extroversion. You could have placed me in any culture on the face of the planet. So you take who I was born as, and you place me in different cultures, and yes, I am going to have different outcomes because the nurture does impact me, okay? But I'm probably going to be an introvert even if I grew up in the Middle East. I am going to be introverted even if I grew up in South America, okay? I'm going to be an introvert. I'm actually an ambivert is really what I count as. But I'm going to be that even if I grew up in the Panhandle of Texas, which is where I grew up, versus anywhere in the world. So there are pieces of us that link to the nature of who we are. That's personality. So So think about this. In psychology, there's not a and oh, I can't remember the exact name now. The name has changed. It used to be multiple personalities. Now is it personality dissociative personality disorder? I can't remember the name now. But think about it. There's not a disorder around having multiple selves or multiple identities, because we have those. There is one around personality. Okay, so personality deals with the nature side of who we are. Okay, and I'm gonna sneeze, so I'm gonna pause. Okay, I'm back. Thank you. Had a sneezing attack, so didn't want to do that on camera. So we've talked about personality. It's the more nature part of who we actually are. So now let's move into the next thing. So remember, personality, self, and identity are not the same thing. So as we begin, here we are with self. Now, this definition of the self here, the self is the evolving composite of self-awareness, self-concept, and self-esteem. This is from our text, okay? The self, if you were to take a picture of it, it would be very blurry because it is always evolving. It's always changing. And one of the things that we do as human beings is we navigate our world, and sort of our self shifts depending on what social context we are in. Okay? So it's this evolving concept with self-awareness, self-concept, and self-esteem. We are going to do a quick definition of each of the three of these things in a minute, and then come back to it in another screencast, because these are the core components of our self, and we're going to talk about how they impact our communication. Okay? This next piece here is an outside definition of self. This is another perspective for us to consider. So self is the multidimensional process that involves forming and acting from social perspectives that arise and evolve in communication with others and ourselves. So this piece of who we are, okay, multidimensional, meaning multi-contextual. It's always happening. It's happening in many layers all the time. It is a process. It's always in process. Even the older you get, you're going to be evolving yourself. Age and experience change the way that we act from social act socially. Sorry, I cannot talk today. Good Lord. Let's record today. All right. And then as we communicate with other people and with ourselves, this idea of who we are as a self evolves. And so the self is a product of situations, okay? So you could plot me in the panhandle of Texas, and I'm going to end up a lot like this. And then you're going to, you plot me into you know, Southern California, and I would be different. If you took me and raised me in New York, I would be different, okay? Self-wise, my personality would probably still be relatively the same, but my self would be different. So the self is both a product of situations and a shaper of behavior in situations, okay? This is another outside piece of material right here. So myself, in the way that I understand it, will shape my behavior in situations, specifically for us in here, how I communicate interpersonally, okay? So I have some more. Now, this is something we will do very quickly right now and then come back to in a future screencast, because this is the backbone of our material for this week. The self is the evolving composite of these three things. So I said this here, so now these are the three things. The self is the evolving composite of self-awareness, the ability to view yourself as a unique person, distinct from your surrounding environment, and to reflect on your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. I, as a human being, because I have self-awareness, can sit here and I can reflect on my thoughts. I can actually ask myself, you know, I wonder why I'm thinking the way that I'm thinking right now. That requires some self-awareness, okay? It requires self-awareness to just have a thought anyway, but I can actually reflect on my thoughts. I can reflect on my feelings. How am I feeling today? Why am I feeling this way? I'm behaving this way. Why am I behaving this way? So that requires self-awareness. The self-concept is your overall perception of who you are. So how do I see myself? If I am tall, if I see myself as tall and male, cisgendered, stuff like that, that is going to be part of my self-concept, okay? The self-esteem is the value, positive or negative, that I assign to those elements of my self-concept. So I said I'm tall. I could feel really good about it, or I could be bothered by it. If I were teased about it or whatever, I could be upset about that. Makes sense? So that is the list of the parts that make up the self. Okay? So you've got personality, which is a little more on the nurture side. We've got self, and I've even got a little more self here. Okay, just to clarify it. Self-awareness prompts us to ask, who am I? And the self-concept is the answer. Self-esteem is the answer to the follow-up question, given who I am, what's my evaluation of myself? This is stuff from our book, okay? And the self is the nurture part. The self is the nurture of how we see and understand ourselves. So we have personality, like there's some stuff that's just wired into us. Oh, sorry, my phone is ringing. And I will pause and answer it. I'm back again. Sorry, apparently I'm going to have to stop and do stuff today during this video. All right, so self is more nurture, okay? So now that brings us to identity. What in the heck is the difference between the personality, the self, and now identity? We've got the first two figured out. What is identity? Well, okay. Identity is going to be the sum of the parts, okay? The sum of the parts. Self, personality, okay? And then it includes your worldview, it includes your experience, it includes your traits and characteristics, social relations, roles, social group memberships that define who you are. So you take your personality and yourself, and it all conglomerates to make you who you are, and then you go out and you as a social human being have your identities, the roles, the social group membership, social relations, stuff like that, that impact the identity side of us, okay? And this part right here is just so fascinating when it comes to identity, okay? So I have personality, I have myself, and then I've got my different identities. So I've got my identity as a professor, my identity as a spouse, my identity as a parent, my identity as a son, my identity as a grandson, my identity as a great-grandson, my identity as a colleague at work, my identity as a musician. I've got my identity. I mean, there's all these different pieces of who I am, right? And so these identities can be focused on the past, what used to be true of myself. So maybe I've, part of my identity now is I used to be a student. I am no longer a student. Thank God. Hey, if you keep going, it'll eventually end, okay? And you won't be a student one day. Hang in there, everybody. What is true, or I'm sorry, what used to be true, the present, what is true of me now, right? My identity as a parent did not really come about until I had a kid, right? So these things happen kind of with the present, and then the future, who you expect or you wish to become. So as a student, maybe that's the student is a present and future thing, and then you've also got the person one feels obligated to become, because we are talking about social relations. We're talking about memberships that define who we are. Who do you feel obligated to become? Or the person you fear you will become. Maybe you were around some bad examples growing up, talking about IPTs, and that is something you fear you will become. Identities are orienting this past, present, future. They provide meaning-making lenses and focus our attention on some, but not other, features of the immediate context. They orient who we are. They orient how we see ourselves, how we understand ourselves. They give us the meaning-making anchor in the moment, which is so important for us. The choices that we make become identity congruent, okay? And the feeling that we know ourselves, and this is what the book actually talks about, the know thyself thing early in the chapter, and it's an important thing for us to do, even if it's faulty, okay? So folks, that is the difference between personality, self, and identity. And now, in the next screencast, we will move forward to talk more about the components of the self and really dig into how it impacts communication. I'll see you there.